Thank you for your interest in our research project titled Food Insecurity and First Year Doctor of Physical Therapy Students. My name is Suzy Okere, and I'd like to thank our research team, Cassie Ortega, Edgar Balderas, Raul Chavez, and Chris Hunter. And we are all from the Department of Physical Therapy and the College of Health Professions at Texas State University. To start with a little bit of background information, food insecurity has been associated with adverse physical, cognitive, and mental health outcomes. And clearly, none of these outcomes are desirable for graduate students. Food insecurity has been well studied in undergraduate students, but there's very limited research documenting food insecurity in graduate students. Our research team did a pilot study previously with third-year Doctor of Physical Therapy graduate students, but there is limited research documenting food insecurity in first-year Doctor of Physical Therapy students. So the purpose of this current study was to document the presence of food insecurity in first-year Doctor of Physical Therapy graduate students. The methods that we used a descriptive observational study design, and we had 40 first-year Doctor of Physical Therapy students participate. So we typically have a class size of around 44, so getting 40 students to participate was a high rate of participation. There were 13 males and 27 females, and this is a fairly typical distribution for our classes, and about 68% of the participants were a racial and or ethnic minority. And this number is fairly typical for us as well. It may be a high percentage compared to institutions, health professions institutions across Texas, but this is fairly typical for us. And the average age was 24, which again is pretty typical for us. For instrumentation, we used an 11-question demographic survey and also the U.S. Adult Food Security Survey. This research, was approved by Texas State University's IRB. And during the first semester of our 3-year program, participants completed both that 11-question demographic survey and the U.S. Adult Food Security Survey. Regarding data collection, the students were recruited via email using Qualtrics software. So that was how the initial recruitment was made. The email gave them an overview of the study, provided informed consent, and it included a link to the surveys. So we sent out the email the night before we were doing the data collection. So we sent the email out so that they could get that overview. Then the next day in class, we used some class time in order to allow the students to complete the surveys. So the research team went into the class, went through the information again about the details of the study, answered any questions that the students had, and then we remained available if the students had any additional questions. But I, as the primary researcher, I did leave the room just to not have any inappropriate influence on the students. We used Microsoft Excel to analyze the data, and that was to calculate means and frequencies for the different questions. So now moving on to our results. So due to financial reasons, half of our participants could not afford to eat balanced meals. And the concept of balanced meals is important because food insecurity isn't just getting at, do people have enough food? It's also taking into consideration, do they have nutritious foods or do they have balanced meals available to them? So it's not just availability of food itself. About 38% of our participants had skipped or cut the size of meals. 40% ate less than what they felt they should eat. 45% worried that food would run out. And about 38% reported that food did not last and they didn't have money to get more food. Other results that we documented were that participants reported, about 13% of participants reported that they were hungry, but they didn't eat. 10% of our participants lost weight because they didn't have enough money to afford food. And about 7.5% had gone a whole day without eating because there was not enough money for food. And then lastly, this survey then identifies what level of food security you fall within. And so for our study, 15% of our participants fell in the low food security level, and about 28% fell in the very low food security level. So when you combine those two, that's about 40% of our total participants fell into either low or very low food security levels. So we have several conclusions. One, we documented that food insecurity is present among first-year Doctor of Physical Therapy graduate students. So again, in the past, we had documented it in third-year students, and now we also documented it in first-year students. When we compared the levels of food insecurity from our pilot study in third-year students to the current study with first-year students, it actually appears that the food insecurity levels are higher for our first-year students. Now, we haven't collected enough data on enough cohorts to determine if this is like a reproducible observation or if there is just something unique about the first-year and third-year cohorts that we did these two studies on. So we are continuing to collect data to hopefully get a more clear picture of food insecurity in first and third year students. Appropriate interventions should be identified to support graduate students impacted by food insecurity, with particular emphasis on our first year students. And these interventions, so some examples of interventions would be providing a food pantry. Our department had provided a food pantry for several years, and then our college, the College of Health Professions, now has a food pantry on our campus, and so that is we no longer have our department food pantry. We rely on the college food pantry. So we make that information available to students. The other thing that we do is if their students aren't comfortable accessing the university-related food pantry, we do make information available to them about some of the local community food pantries in case that is a preference for them. Other interventions could be making like graduate assistant positions available or connecting students with some part-time work so that they can afford some more food or, the more balanced food choices. So those interventions can help minimize some of these adverse physical and cognitive and mental health outcomes that are clearly associated with food insecurity. And instead of having the students have to spend their mental energy on figuring out where their next meal or where their next nutritious meal is going to come from, students can then use that mental energy to focus on their graduate studies. I'd like to thank Dr. Barbara Melzer. This research was funded by the Dr. Barbara Melzer Endowed Professorship. Thank you.